Hola, mi nombre es Julia Albarracin y soy profesora de la Universidad Western Illinois. Hoy voy a presentar The Cultural Integration of DACA Recipients in Schools. So schools are central institutions of community life and have an essential role in the social integration of newcomer, immigrant, and refugee youth. And since the 1982 Blyler versus Doe decision by the court that allows undocumented students to attend K through 12 education in the US, they're also central for their incorporation into society. One important thing to mention is that schools that are integrated and have little segregation can promote all students' feelings of safety, interethnic group cohesion, and trust in teachers. Upon arrival in the country, immigrants need to learn the local language to communicate effectively. And one thing to mention also is that language and identity are usually intertwined. Integration is the degree to which an individual is connected to other individuals in a social setting, and relationships with peers are essential for integration. The most common friendships in multicultural societies are among members of the same ethnic or cultural group. Early studies of school desegregation show that relatively few interethnic friendships emerge in desegregated schools. People who belong to the same ethnic or cultural group share similar experiences, values, and attitudes when compared with members of the outgroup. This similarity, in turn, improves mutual understanding and results in stronger emotional support and social affirmation. So I didn't ask the students in my sample if their schools were diverse or not, but this information came up in all the interviews but 3. And as this chart shows, most of the students in my sample attended diverse schools in Illinois. The school diversity made students feel more comfortable. For instance, Angel, who later moved to the Chicago suburbs, explained, well, I was kind of fortunate to have classmates who were also Latino, Mexican, American, Chicano, because I kind of identified with some of them. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Chicago, but there were a lot of Polish folks in the area. So I would say majority of my classes were 60, 70% Latino, and the other 40% were Polish, so a lot of immigrant families. In a similar vein, Andres stated, my school had a lot of minorities, African Americans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, and other Latin countries. So it wasn't too hard. We kind of grew up in the same culture. Yeah, a lot of the faculty were either Hispanic, Latin, or African American. They just knew who we were. So I didn't feel like a minority at all. So as this shows, students that attended diverse schools felt welcome and comfortable. The experiences of the undocumented youth who attended predominantly white schools were less positive. For example, Angel moved to the Chicago suburbs, and was able to reflect on this change. And then in 5th grade is when we moved out of Chicago to the suburbs outside of Chicago. And there things were a little different because the suburbs were predominantly white. Moving out of Chicago and all the way to public school from 8th grade was not a positive change. I think that's when I felt more out of place. There were fewer Latinos, and I didn't really feel like I fit in with those schools. Angel's move to predominantly white area in the Chicago suburbs was not a positive experience for him. This experience made him feel out of place, like he did not belong. So we also experienced a negative change after moving, but in her case, from Georgia to Illinois. She explained, I think the hard thing for me, and I don't know if this is an identity piece, but in Georgia, you will see mostly teachers who are African American, and here in Illinois, you mainly saw white teachers, and I think that was uncomfortable for me. It was just weird because I wasn't used to it. In Georgia, I mainly grew up with African American and Hispanic kids. There was literally only one white kid. Most of the programs that my interviewees attended offer English as a second language classes. But despite this, most of the students in my sample also struggle with learning their English. Sadie, for example, had a difficult time trying to learn English, and she explained, I do have flashbacks of going to school. I remember I had a hard time with the language, which is English. I think that was the most difficult part. I was trying to make friends and I didn't understand, so I kind of got frustrated. So when I tried to tell my mom, I don't want to be here anymore, I didn't want to be here because I couldn't understand the language. I would say language was the most difficult for me. Then there were other students that had an easy time learning the language. Ernesto, for example, who came to the United States when he was 5, learned English at school, but with no special support. In this sense, he explained. So in school, I started when I was in 1st grade. I went to a school called Oakland Park. Again, this was a rural town of about 10 to 12,000 people. But I think I learned English pretty fast. Honestly, we never had anyone who taught English as a second language or anything. English was my first language at school and Spanish at home. I honestly didn't even notice. Other participants also learned the language easily. Andres, who came to the United States when he was 2 years old, explained, I'm pretty sure I spoke Spanish. That's what my parents have told me. But as a kid, I was a quick learner and I picked up English really quick. But it's not my first language, of course. Then there was another part of the questionnaire that asked participants about their interactions with their peers. And I used in this section of my research, Berry's 1997 paths to incorporation. He calls them acculturation, actually, and divides them in assimilation, separation, integration, and marginalization. Assimilation is when the person assimilates to the dominant group culture and abandons their own ethnic culture. Separation is when a person places value in their culture of origin and avoid interactions with the local culture. In the integration pathway, there is an interest in both maintaining one's original culture while engaging in daily interactions with other groups. And in the marginalization pathway, there is little possibility of or interest in cultural maintenance and little interest in having relations with others. So as that chart shows, most participants chose separation followed by integration, marginalization, and assimilation. So Estela, for example, was somewhat forced to assimilate when she lived in Phoenix, but she chose to have Latino friends when she moved to Illinois. And she explained, oh yeah, it was a little difficult. I didn't speak English, so in the school I attended in Phoenix, I did feel a little weird. I did feel a little discriminated. Even my sisters do remember, they're older than me, and they were, I want to say, in middle school. And it was hard. The teachers didn't want you to speak Spanish, and it was a little hard to blend in the beginning because I didn't know the language. So I started picking up a lot of it from my cousins. I have a lot of cousins that were around our ages. But yeah, we made friends. Like friend-wise, it was easy to make friends. I don't know, for me it was. I know that for my sisters it wasn't. I don't really know anything, to be honest, but I really felt a little like an outcast with the teachers. But it was a little different when I moved to Illinois because we were living in a community of Hispanic people, so a lot spoke Spanish, and I feel like I fit in. Some participants chose separation because they had things in common with the children of their same ethnic group. Jose, for instance, explained, so I befriended the only child in my class who was bilingual, but I remember my teachers were kind of interested. I remember one day they allowed me to read a book in front of the class that was entirely in Spanish. I'm not sure what the other kids got out of it, but they were accepting and they tried to make it work with the language barrier. My research also shows that ESL classes gave participants a sense of belonging and an opportunity to befriend members of their own ethnic group. Anna, for instance, explained, elementary was a little bit easier because I was put in ESL courses and other students were also Hispanic and they spoke the language. So it was easy for me to hang out with them and to kind of pick up on the same stuff that they were talking about and probably learn. In other cases, participants remain separated from the dominant group because of explicit action by the dominant group, such as segregation. Zoe, for instance, attended a diverse school and gravitated toward other Latino kids, and she explained the white majority made discriminatory comments directed to the Latina children, like go back to your country, go back to Mexico. Zoe explained, I think when you're starting high school, it's like a whole big change. Everything is more difficult. But I think I made friends right away. And there were also a lot of Hispanic kids there. So I think it was easy for me to just kind of make friends. Finally, other students also chose a path of integration. In many cases, it happened later in life, later like in middle school. Anna, for instance, was forced to integrate with Anglo-American students when her parents were deported and she and her siblings moved with their aunt and uncle. Although it was challenging at first, she found her way toward integration through sports. Anna explained, my aunt pushed us to be very involved, so I was part of the track team. Most of those in track were American students. I was pushed to do softball, and almost all the softball players were American. We didn't have soccer at the time, so it was not an option. So I found that I got along with them well, but there was always a little kind of a cultural difference. I think I was just so close and tied to my Mexican side that sometimes it was hard for me to want to interact with Americans until I became a teammate. When you become a teammate, then you need to help one another to succeed in a softball game or whatever it was. And then finally, there were some participants that were marginalized. Benita, for example, had trouble making friends, and even if she eventually made one, I classified her as a case of marginalization because she said she didn't have any friends until middle school. She was discriminated against by her classmates. I didn't have many friends. They couldn't understand me. They couldn't understand my accent and my English. My English was very poor. I only knew the basics. And it was hard because I thought I was dumb because I couldn't read and write. It was definitely different from Mexico. It was harder because of the language. I had trouble reading, I had trouble writing, I had trouble speaking. Like I didn't want to talk to the students and they would just make fun of me because I didn't speak English. Like I did make a friend. She became my best friend throughout middle school. So to conclude, the majority of the school students in my sample attended with usually diverse schools help students develop a sense of belonging and share identity with other school children. Most of the schools my interviewees attended offer some sort of English as a second language program. Despite this, the process of language acquisition was challenging for the majority of my participants. Teachers and classmates alike supported the process of language acquisition. Friendships proved vital in the cooperation of immigrant youth in the United States. Some participants assimilated into the dominant group, but in most cases, the schools either lacked a diverse body of students or the cultural norms were imposed on the participants. Participants who followed integration usually went through a stage first where they have friends of their own ethnic group while learning the language. Participants who chose the pathway of separation were of three types: those who separated by choice, those who were forced to separate by a factor outside of their control, and those who separated due to segregation. Finally, participants rarely chose marginalization as a path, but rather were forced into it due to discrimination and segregation.